Oh, what a crowd. I'm fired up now. I'm gonna take off my jacket. I'm fired up. What a crowd. What a crowd. Thank you so much. Well, I am so grateful to all of you for taking the time out to come on this late summer, early fall evening to talk a little politics. You just heard from the next congressman from the 3rd District, John Yarmouth. Folks ask me, why are you going to Louisville? I said, it's on my way home. And it's good to be back with some common sense Midwestern folk. Because sometimes things get a little crazy in Washington. You know, there are times where I'm in Washington and I start feeling like I'm spinning my wheels. And I watch Bill Frist, and I watch Tom DeLay, and now Denny Hastert, and Mitch McConnell. But when I get discouraged, I think about a woman I met right before Election Day in 2004, right before I was about to be elected to the United States Senate. At that point, we were feeling pretty confident because I was running against Alan Keyes. And so we had organized a big celebration in the church on the south side of Chicago. And there were about 2,000 people there, and choirs were singing, and folks were rallying, everybody was fired up. And my staff said, you know, there's a woman who wants to meet you. She's driven a long way, and she'd like to have a chance to just shake your hand and take a picture with you before you go on stage. And I said, okay, and I went back, and I met this woman, and in fact, she had driven quite a long ways, or had been driven quite a long way. She had already cast her absentee ballot, she told me. And she said that she was proud of me, and she had voted for me, and she hoped that I would keep my promises and do the right thing. And we took a picture and had a wonderful conversation. And all of this would be unexceptional, except this woman, whose name was Marguerite Lewis, had been born in 1899 and was 105 years old. And I thought about this woman as I was about to go on stage, knowing that probably the next day I'd be elected to the United States Senate. I thought about this woman, Marguerite Lewis, African-American woman, born in Louisiana, not that far away from slavery, born in the shadow of Jim Crow, born at a time where there were no planes in the sky and no cars on the road, born at a time where it was more likely that an African American would be lynched than that they would vote, born in the midst of struggle, born in the midst of uncertainty. I thought about what this woman must have seen decade after decade, year after year. How she had seen in the early 20s, suddenly women finally gaining the right to vote. And how she had seen FDR lift up a nation out of its fear and insist that all we had to fear was fear itself, and put together the New Deal programs that would lift people out of poverty and make sure that senior citizens had some security, and make sure that farmers wouldn't be bankrupted during a bad crop year or because prices were depressed, and made sure that there were minimum wage laws in place, and made sure that there were laws against child labor. And then I thought about how she would have seen FDR help lead that arsenal of democracy to defeat fascism and Hitler and liberate not just a continent, but a world. And then I would have thought about how she would have seen her uncles and her brothers and her cousins who had fought for this country come back and still have to ride in the back of the bus. And I thought about how, despite all that, she hadn't given up hope. And then, in the late 50s and early 60s, she would have seen that hope was breaking out over the horizon in the form of the civil rights movement. And the fact that she had never believed that, in fact, that she had always known that she had a claim to make on this country. And she would have seen women who walked instead of rode the bus after a long day of doing somebody else's laundry and looking after somebody else's children because they were marching for freedom. And she would have seen all the young people of every color and every ethnic group and every religion who had gotten on buses, freedom rides, down to Mississippi and Alabama to register voters. And she would have seen the Civil Rights Act of 1964 pass and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 pass. And she would have seen the people start lining up to vote for the first time, and she would have gotten in that line. And she had voted each and every time since that time because she knew that in this country we call America, that no matter how tough things seem sometimes, no matter how difficult it seems sometimes, that there is a part of us, there is a collective spirit in this nation that says our possibilities are boundless, and that there is no reason why we can't achieve the kind of American dream for every child and every adult in this country that was promised when the Founding Fathers drafted their Constitution. And so here's the question. What's happening to Marguerite Lewis's dream right now? What have we seen happen over the last 5 years in this country? Who have we become? What do we believe in? What are the values that we stand by? Where do we put our time and our energy and our money? What does our leadership assert is the most important thing about us as a country? It seems as if we have an administration that basically believes in a precept that they call the ownership society, but in history has been known as something else. It's been called social Darwinism. And the basic idea is this: instead of believing that we're all in it together and that we've all got a stake in each other, they basically believe that you're on your own. If you don't have health insurance and your child gets sick and you don't have the money to pay for it, that's tough luck, because life's not fair sometimes. And if you're a child who doesn't have the wisdom to be born to the right parents in the right suburb, so you end up in an underfunded school that doesn't teach, and you don't have access to decent early childhood education, and you don't have access to teachers that are teaching the subject, and you don't have the money to go to college, well, you know what? Pick yourself up by your own bootstraps. That's not our problem. And if you're a worker who's been working 30 years in a plant and have your retirement and your health care tied up in that job, and suddenly you see that job shipped off to Mexico or China, and you've got some federal bankruptcy court somewhere that's saying that in fact that company doesn't owe the promise that was made to you, and that they can finagle their way out of it, so that you are left with nothing. And you've got to figure out how you're going to survive your retirement, despite the fact that you've been laboring and doing exactly what we say Americans are supposed to be doing for the last 30 years. That's the idea of this administration, that you're on your own. And here's the thing, it's a tempting idea. That's a tempting idea because it doesn't demand anything of us. It's the easiest thing in the world to say, I'm just going to look after myself. The problem is it doesn't work. That's not what built this country. It is true that this country has been built on individual initiative and self-reliance. We take pride in the fact that we don't expect government to solve our problems. We don't want government to solve all our problems. But alongside that famous individualism, we have always had this other idea that says, in addition to individual responsibility, we also have mutual responsibility that expresses itself in everything that we do. It expresses itself in our churches, in our synagogues, and our mosques. It expresses itself when we help coach the Little League team. It expresses itself when farmers used to help raise a barn, but it should also express itself through our government. We have a government because there's some things we do better together than we do on our own. That's the essence of why we have a government. And so the question in this election is not just whether or not this new prescription drug plan makes any sense, despite the fact that we should have closed that donut hole by making sure that prescription drug companies have to negotiate with Medicare recipients. There's no reason for us not to do that, but that's not the sole issue in the campaign. The sole issue in the campaign isn't the fact that we got tax cuts that are going to folks who don't need them and weren't even asking for them. That's one issue in the campaign, but that's not essentially what this campaign is about. What this campaign is about, what John's campaign is about, what Ken's campaign is about, what every campaign across the country is about, is who are we as a people? What do we stand for? How do we affirm what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature? Are we going to operate on the basis of selfishness and fear, or are we going to operate on the basis of community and hope? That is the essence of this campaign. A campaign to take back our government, a campaign to take back our future. That's what we're working on right now. That's why you're here tonight. That's what we're going to see happen in November. You won't hear me. You won't hear me quote Newt Gingrich very often. But I tell you what, Newt Gingrich said something kind of interesting several months ago. He was being interviewed, and the reporter said, Speaker Gingrich, what do you think about this upcoming election? What do you think Democrats should do if you were running the Democratic Party? He said, I would just campaign on two words. He said, if I were Democrats, I'd just campaign on two words: had enough. Had enough. Now, I think old Newt is onto something there, because I've had enough of this administration. I have had enough of tax cuts for the rich and service cuts for the poor and the middle class squeeze for working families. I've had enough of that. I've had enough of a no action, do nothing attitude towards the health care crisis in this country. I've had enough of a No Child Left Behind program that leaves the money behind for No Child Left Behind. I've had enough of that. I've had enough of the fear-mongering that takes place by this administration. I've had enough of talking tough and not being able to catch Osama bin Laden. I've had enough of that. I've had enough of an administration that thinks its only anti-terrorism policy rather than trying to secure our homeland, rather than trying to make sure that our ports are safe and our chemical plants and nuclear plants are secured and finishing the job in Afghanistan, the best you can do is try to weaken the Geneva Conventions so that John McCain and John Warner and Lindsey Graham have to stand up and say, why would we do that to our troops in case they got captured? I've had enough of that. I don't need talking tough and then you acting weak. I want a tough and smart foreign policy, because the other side's got a monopoly on the tough and dumb foreign policy. My grandfather fought in Patton's army and marched across Europe. Sometimes we have to fight to protect ourselves. But we fight because we have to, not because of ideological notions. We fight because we are protecting ourselves, not because we've got some idea in our heads, some fantasy about remaking the Middle East. We fight and then we finish the job instead of leaving our troops and our military hollowed out because we were ill prepared. We had an ill-conceived plan that was not well thought through. I have had enough of the kind of foreign policy that puts those young men and young women at risk each and every day without a clear exit strategy, without any idea of how this is making us safer, without any idea of when it's going to end. I've had enough of that. So here, which brings us then to the final question. If we've had enough, if we've got another idea of what our democracy should be, if we've got another idea of what our community should be, if we have another idea of what this incredible experiment in self-government should be, then the question is, what are we going to do about it? The question is, what are we going to do about it? When it comes to election time, we still see too many folks sitting on the sidelines. We've got too many excuses for why we're not helping out our congressional candidates, why we're not in their offices licking envelopes and making phone calls and knocking on doors. We've got too many reasons why we're too busy. We've got too many reasons why we won't write a check to candidates, despite the fact that we know that the only way the other side is going to win in an election like this is because they're going to try to outspend us and put a bunch of negative ads on television. We know all these things. We've been through it before. We see it every single year. And then maybe, just maybe, there's a part of us as Democrats that maybe we're not entirely convinced about who we are. We're not entirely sure about what we stand for. Maybe there's this sense somehow that this party is still going through an identity crisis. So let me say this to you today. The time for the identity crisis is over. Too much is at stake. Don't let anybody tell you that we don't know what we stand for. We know who we are. We know what we believe. We believe in making sure that everybody should have the opportunity to get a job that pays a living wage. That's something we believe in. We believe that nobody should be bankrupt when they get sick, and that everybody should have access to decent health care. That's something we believe. We believe that schools should be adequately funded and every child should be able to learn and they should be able to go to college even if they don't have a lot of money. We believe that. We believe in a foreign policy that's based not just on military might, but also the quality of our moral character as a nation. That's something we believe. We believe every senior citizen should be able to retire with dignity and respect. That's something we believe. We are the party of FDR. We're the party of Jefferson. We're the party of Kennedy. Just in case you start wondering whether or not you're up to the feat, I want you to think back to Marguerite Lewis. I want you to think about that 105-year-old woman who was able to go out there and cast her ballot and still have time to come to a rally for a young man who was running for the United States Senate and shake his hand and take a picture with him. My attitude is, you know what? If Marguerite Lewis isn't tired, then I shouldn't be tired. If Marguerite Lewis isn't tired, you shouldn't be tired. If Marguerite Lewis is ready to kick off her bedroom slippers and start marching to make sure that we win this election in November, then everybody here should be out there marching. I want you guys to work. I want you guys to knock on doors. I want you to make phone calls. We're going to get John Yarmouth elected. We're going to get Ken Lucas elected. We are going to take back the House. We are going to take back the Senate. And we are going to create the kind of America that all of us believe in. Thank you very much, Louisville. I love you guys. Thank you.